Hello, Com 168. This week we get to cover one of my favorite chapters in the Miller text, Critical and Feminist Approaches. You'll notice that the title says Critical Approaches. It was later added the feminist approaches to it because the feminist approaches are so important to the critical approaches to communication. So I want to focus a little bit on some of the basic premises of the chapter, and then we'll also talk about some of the theories from chapter 6 as well. Some of the basic premises of critical approaches just in general can be seen on this slide. The first is that critical approaches view organizations as sites of domination. So they mean that every organization from a critical approach oppresses someone, and in every organization there's someone who is in power. And there's a whole section in your textbook that I would love for you to read about the pervasiveness of power and how it's in every organization. There's someone or a certain group of people who are in charge, and at the same time there are people who are also oppressed. And organizations are not neutral. Instead, they represent structures where relationships produce and reproduce certain types of power. However, the ultimate goal of the critical approach is emancipation or freedom or liberation, meaning that those people in the organization who do not have the power, the ultimate goal is for them to be freed. And of course, the last bullet says that organizational members who are oppressed should use methods of resistance. And there's a section in the text as well that talks about resistance, and that can be actually found on page 107. And it says resistance, the concept of resistance, that is, considers how workers can exert counter pressure on the exercise of power and control. And so resistance doesn't necessarily mean picketing or rioting or even just not coming to work at all. Though like strikes, boycotts, and social movements can be seen as methods of resistance. But there are other ways of resistance that can be used by organizational members as well that are not as overt. And so when we're thinking about critical approaches in organizations, I want you to start thinking about some more subtle ways that you can resist the oppression of those in power. So you may say yes and then not complete a project collectively, or you may stop working as hard, or your team may stop going to company meetings. And these can all be seen as methods of resistance in organizational settings. Some other terms in the text that you should be familiar with are ideology and hegemony, and this is on page 105 and it goes on to page 106. Ideology refers to the taken for granted assumptions about reality that influence perceptions of situations and events. And that's a quote from page 105. And that's really essentially the basic assumptions that an organization leads its employees to believe. So the ideology of an organization may be to work 50 hours a week. These taken for granted assumptions that you just kind of assume are true, or I'm just going to work a couple of extra hours and not get paid because that's just kind of how we do things around here. And that's the ideology of an organization. And now in terms of hegemony is actually a process, and again, this is on page 105, in which a dominant group leads another group to accept subordination as the norm. So it's not simple domination, but instead it involves attempts by certain groups to take control of other groups. So hegemony is a process, but one thing that I want to reinforce is that this process in critical approaches is not always something that's overt. So when we do the case studies on Yahoo and on Google, sometimes these things can be seen as being really positive aspects of organizations, but instead they're using various methods to kind of get employees to work differently or to even behave differently, and they're trying to essentially take control or dominate employees. On page 106, under emancipation, we talked about that a little bit and how that means freedom or liberation. And essentially, that's the ultimate goal of the critical approach, emancipation. So in this chapter, we're going to focus on two primary critical approaches. The first is a theory of concerted control, and the second is feminist theories of organizational communication. And that section is a little bit broader than the first. A theory of concerted control is on page 108, and it goes to page 111 in your text. And essentially, concerted control refers to how power relationships can be transformed in an era of team-based and alternative form organizations. And for those of you who work in various organizations, you may see that the new in thing is to essentially work in teams. And from a critical perspective, while this may be great for organizations, it also is problematic because it transforms or even transfers the power from a manager to employees controlling each other or controlling their peers. And from a critical perspective, this is seen as problematic because it's changing the hierarchy of the organization, but also trying to essentially control the employees in a way that's a bit different than how it used to be. So I want you to actually even focus on the first section, which is control. So with control, the first section, there are three different types: simple, technological, and bureaucratic. And simple control is the direct exercise of control. So someone is telling someone else what to do. A fellow employee, somebody on your team is just telling you what to do. Technological control is a bit different. It's using various forms of technology to control a worker or even an employee. So an example could be maybe the cameras in the building are monitoring the employees as they go in and out. It could be that they're having you check in and out using a time card. It could be that the employer is checking your Facebook page or your Instagram page for information about you, or even something as if the employee is checking your work email and monitoring your the emails that you're sending to others. And these are all forms of technological control that employers are using to control their employees. Bureaucratic control is control based on rules and hierarchy. So that's a little bit different, but it's also kind of simple to understand because it's based on somebody being your boss or your manager or your direct supervisor. This is a person who is controlling their employees based on simple hierarchical structure, almost similar to what's in the classical approach to communication from chapter 2 that we discussed. Identification is even more subtle than the control that we just talked about. Identification is when organizations want members to feel loyalty toward them and themselves to the organization. And so they create ways for organizations to identify with employees and for employees to identify with organizations. So on your birthday, they may send you a birthday card that says happy birthday, and maybe they'll send you a gift card or a token of their appreciation to show you how much they care about your birthday. Or maybe you're getting married or there's a special occasion in your life and they want to celebrate it with you because they're trying to identify with you and they want you to feel loyalty toward them. And so this can be seen if you ever want to leave an organization. You say, oh, I kind of feel so bad because I really like them and they even sent me some gifts for my birthday party or for my wedding, and I'm not sure if I want to leave them. And these are methods that organizations use for employees to identify with them so they'll feel a sense of loyalty to them. And then you've got discipline. And again, we talked about the theory of concerted control being from almost a team-based approach. And so discipline means that team members reward and punish behaviors that work with or deviate from the norms and values of the group. And so this does not necessarily mean that the team member can fire the employee because, again, they're peers, but it is, in a sense, team members can make that employee feel as if he or she is an outlier or part of the out group. They can report that employee to management. And they can both reward and punish behaviors in a way that make you feel, or an employee feel, as if they are part of the group or they're not part of the group, which is very, very can be very hard on employees if their peers don't like them. And so many times employees will want to conform when their team members are pressuring them, as opposed to when it's a boss or a supervisor that's providing this type of pressure on them. When we look at feminist theories of organizational communication, it's much broader than the theory of conservative control, which was developed by one person. But feminist theories of organizational communication are much broader, and there's no single feminist theory. But just in general, feminist theories view organizations as patriarchal, so they're places that reward males, but also male characteristics like being rational, being logical, and also being aggressive. But through this type of lens, feminist characteristics like empathy and cooperation are not rewarded. So they're appreciated many times, but often they are not rewarded financially or through bonuses or even overtly rewarded at all. And in this sense, I do want you to focus on page 112, where it says that there are some feminist organizational scholars like Ashcraft, and they provide a lot of detail and highlight some of the key theoretical assumptions by scholars who take a feminist approach to organizational communication research. And you'll see there are 5 bullets there that I want you to be familiar with. And the first is the belief that gender is a primary way in which identity and power relations are configured, which means that gender, which is fluid, so not just male and female, but many times the identity of employees and especially of supervisors and managers are configured primarily through gender, and again through male characteristics like rationality, logic, and aggression. So make sure you review those 5, and if you have any questions, I think they're pretty straightforward. Ask them under in the virtual office on Blackboard. There's an interesting section on page 114 about sexual harassment in organizations. And while sexual harassment in an organizational setting does not just happen toward women, there was one investigation that found that women framed sexual harassment often in trivial ways so that they would not look weak. And so on page 114, table 6.2, you'll see some of these framing devices on sexual harassment narratives. And so sometimes women would say that it was justified, or that it was simple flirting, or that's just the way things are, which is the ideology of an organization, or they'll trivialize it, or there is some hesitation in the way, in the manner that they share the type of sexual harassment that was going on. And so this is really important in terms of, as we stated before, how feminist theories view organizations as patriarchal. So they reward characteristics like aggression and rationality, but again, empathy and cooperation or feelings of emotion are not appreciated or even rewarded in an organizational setting. So you'll see why a number of women may not have said anything, especially if they're looking at their careers just in the long term, which is unfortunate that many of these cases are either underreported or not reported at all. Some of the other discussion topics that I want you to think about, and 2 of these are in the Blackboard on the module for this week, Marissa Mayer and Yahoo, and then some of the perks, and that's in quotation marks, of working at Google. But a couple others I want you to think about are student parking, and specifically at Fresno State, think about where students are allowed to park in relationship to where your classes are located. Many times it's not as close as you would like, and then faculty, on the other hand, can park much closer than students. While we can think of this as being just the way things are, or the taken for granted assumptions at Fresno State or any academic institution, you wouldn't think the same thing at another organization, let's say like Target, or an organization where employees have to park in the back. But in academic institutions and at Fresno State, employees get to park close, but the students, who are often seen as being the consumers, are the ones who have to park far away. And think about why that is. And think about it from a critical perspective, as opposed to just saying this is just the way things are. From students, how could you potentially resist this? Or can you? Or are you just accepting it it being just the way things are. Another potential way to understand the critical approach would be if you are working in a career where you get vacation days, and let's say the organization in which you work says, you know what, we're not just going to give you, let's say, 3 weeks of vacation time every week. Instead, we're just going to let you take vacation time whenever you want. And so when you sign that contract and you're getting paid $80,000 a year, you're very, very excited because you can just take vacation days as many as you want. But when you look at the ideology of the organization, you see that most of the employees are there 50 hours a week, and that many of them don't take vacation days. So if you think about that and you think about your salary, even though from an organization's perspective, they said you could take as many vacation days as you want, from a critical perspective and from that theory of concerted control, if you're looking at what your team members are doing, and when you're looking at what the employees are doing, you more than likely are going to take fewer vacation days than you would have had the organization given you a specific number, just based on the pressure that your team members and your fellow employees are essentially kind of putting on you. And so from a critical perspective, the ultimate goal is resistance and emancipation. So even consider some ways that you could resist this, or be free from this type of power or this type of discourse that is in many organizations. So this supposed freedom that you're getting, this leeway that you're getting from organizations in exchange for high salaries, many times at a cost to you and at a cost to your social life. So when you're answering the question specifically about working at Google, I want you to think about some of this and think about how this freedom that you think you're getting in many organizational settings is instead a way, or even represents a site of oppression. Now, as always, if you have any questions, please ask them either via email or ask them in the virtual office.